The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of my modest living room, casting delicate patterns on the worn hardwood floors. I sat in my favorite armchair, a faded blue recliner I'd bought secondhand 20 years ago, watching dust motes dance in the golden beams. My cup of tea had gone cold on the side table next to a stack of library books, and yesterday's newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle I'd finished in ink. The house felt unusually quiet today, that kind of silence that presses against your ears when you're waiting for something you can't quite name. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of lawnmowers and children playing, the soundtrack of suburban life continuing its predictable rhythm. On my coffee table sat an envelope that had arrived this morning, cream-colored paper, expensive weight, with the return address of Thompson & Associates, Estate Planning. Inside was appointment confirmation for next Tuesday. The final reading of my late sister Helen's will. I'm Betty Walsh, 71 years old, and I've lived in this same small house in Riverside, California for 43 years. To most people, including my own family, I'm just a retired grocery store clerk living on Social Security and a tiny pension. They see the thrift store furniture, the 10-year-old car, the careful way I clip coupons and shop sales. They think they know my story. They have no idea how wrong they are. The mantel clock ticked steadily above the fireplace, marking time that suddenly felt both precious and loaded with possibility. Everything was about to change, and only I knew it was coming. Last month, my daughter Linda had come over for one of her monthly check-ins visits that always felt more like inspections than family time. She'd walked through my house with that pinched expression she wore when she disapproved of something, which was most of the time. "Mom, we need to talk about your finances," she'd said, settling into the kitchen chair that creaked under her weight. Linda was 45, a successful real estate agent who drove a BMW and lived in a gated community 20 miles away. I'd been making myself a simple lunch peanut butter sandwich and soup from a can when she started her lecture. "I saw you at Nordstrom last week," Linda continued. "Do you know how much those stores charge for a simple blouse? And Mrs. Patterson from down the street told me you hired a cleaning service." I had indeed treated myself to a new blouse for church. And yes, I'd hired young Maria Santos to help with the heavy cleaning. At 71, scrubbing shower tiles wasn't getting any easier. "Linda, I can afford—" "Mom, stop acting rich." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "You live on Social Security. Dad didn't leave you anything substantial when he died 15 years ago. I know you're proud, but this fantasy that you can spend money like you have, it needs to stop." She'd pulled out a folder of papers then, spreading them across my kitchen table like evidence in a trial. "I've been doing research. There are senior financial counseling services, budget planning programs. And Mom, honestly, this house is too much for you to maintain. There are some lovely senior apartments. I don't need senior apartments. You're being stubborn and unrealistic. Mom, I love you, but you need to stop pretending you're something you're not. You're a grocery store clerk's widow living on a fixed income. There's no shame in that, but there's no point in acting like you're wealthy either." The words stung more than she'd probably intended. Acting rich. As if wanting a decent blouse or clean bathrooms was some kind of delusion of grandeur. But I'd simply smiled, the same patient smile I'd perfected during 40 years of dealing with difficult customers at Peterson's Market. "I'll think about what you've said, dear." What I was really thinking was that Linda was about to get the shock of her life. Too secretive about finances. People underestimate her. Avoids confrontation strengths. Incredibly shrewd with money, patient, excellent judge of character, strategic thinker, successful real estate agent, concerned daughter, practical about money, hidden motive. Embarrassed by mother's poverty, wants inheritance to fund lifestyle, social status anxiety behavior pattern. Condescending, controlling through concern, judges based on appearances. Betty's mailman for 12 years, notices expensive mail deliveries, sees the cleaning service. observes neighbors' reactions. Betty's nephew, financial advisor in Chicago, has been managing her investments secretly and knows the real extent of her wealth. My daily routine was simple and satisfied me completely. I woke at 6:30 every morning, made coffee in the same percolator I'd used for 20 years, and read the newspaper cover to cover. I'd tend to my small garden, mostly roses and vegetables, that fed me through the summer months. 3 mornings a week, I volunteered at the local animal shelter, walking dogs and socializing cats. The young staff there called me Grandma Betty and never questioned why I sometimes slipped them extra money for veterinary bills or special food for the older animals. Afternoons were for reading, crossword puzzles, and managing what Linda thought was a simple checkbook but was actually a carefully disguised financial empire. I'd taught myself investing in the 1,980 seconds, starting with $25 a month from my grocery store paychecks. My weekly shopping trips were exercises in careful budgeting, or so they appeared. I clipped coupons, compared prices, and bought generic brands, just as I'd done when money was truly tight in the early years of my marriage. The difference was that now I chose to live simply, not because I had to. Linda visited every few weeks, usually unannounced, checking to make sure I wasn't overspending or getting confused about money. She'd examine my grocery receipts like a prosecutor, reviewing evidence, sking over any purchase that seemed extravagant. My peace symbol was my late husband Frank's coffee mug, a simple white ceramic cup with a small chip on the handle. I still set it out every morning next to mine, a ritual that connected me to the 42 years we'd shared in this house. It represented the simple life we'd built together, before anyone knew about the money. The neighbors saw me as the sweet elderly widow who kept to herself, lived modestly, and never caused any trouble. They had no idea that I owned a portfolio worth more than most of their houses combined. The first sign that Linda's concern had deeper motivations came when I overheard her talking to her husband Jeff in my driveway after one of her visits. I'd been watering my roses by the front window when their conversation drifted through the screen. "She's spending money she doesn't have," Linda was saying. "Did you see that new vacuum cleaner? And she mentioned getting her hair done at that expensive salon downtown." "Maybe she's just treating herself," Jeff replied. He'd always been kinder to me than Linda was. "With what money?" "Jeff, when she passes away, there's going to be nothing left. No inheritance for the kids' college funds, no help with our mortgage. She's burning through whatever savings Dad left her, and she doesn't seem to understand that when it's gone, it's gone." My hand stilled on the watering can. Linda wasn't worried about my financial security. She was worried about her inheritance. An inheritance she assumed was small, and getting smaller with every unnecessary purchase I made. "Maybe we should talk to her about putting some money aside," Jeff suggested. "I've tried. She gets defensive. But Jeff, we need to start planning for when she can't live independently anymore. If she spent everything on cleaning services and department store clothes, we'll be stuck paying for her care ourselves." The realization hit me like cold water. Linda's visits, her budget lectures, her pushes towards senior housing, none of it was about helping me. It was about protecting what she saw as her future financial security. She thought she was managing a poor elderly mother who was foolishly spending her last dollars. She had no idea she was actually harassing a wealthy woman who was carefully managing a substantial estate. 2 weeks after that overheard conversation, Linda arrived with her sister-in-law Patricia, a certified financial planner who specialized in senior money management. They'd clearly planned this intervention together. Patricia carried a briefcase full of charts and brochures, while Linda wore her most serious business suit, the armor she used for difficult real estate negotiations. "Mom, we're concerned," Linda began, settling Patricia at my kitchen table like they owned the place. "Patricia has agreed to look at your finances and help us create a sustainable budget." Patricia smiled with the professional warmth of someone who dealt with difficult elderly clients regularly. "Mrs. Walsh, there's no shame in needing help with money management. Many seniors find that fixed incomes require careful planning. I appreciate your concern, but, Mom, please. Just listen. Linda's voice carried that edge of impatience she'd developed over the years. We know Dad didn't leave much. We know your pension from the grocery store is tiny. But you're acting like money grows on trees. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out worksheets. Let's start with the basics. What's your monthly Social Security payment? I told them, watching Patricia write numbers on her forms. And your pension? Again, I provided the modest figure exactly what they expected to hear. Any other income? Investment dividends? Rental property? Part-time work? No, I said simply. Linda leaned forward triumphantly. See? Patricia, show her the numbers. Show her how much she's overspending. Patricia's calculator clicked as she added figures. Mrs. Walsh, based on your income, you should be spending no more than $1,200 per month on all expenses. But Linda tells me you've been indulging in some costly purchases lately. A cleaning service costs at least $80 a visit, Linda added. That new vacuum was probably $300. And don't get me started on what you're spending at Nordstrom. I sat quietly, letting them build their case against me. They had no idea they were creating a presentation about someone who didn't exist, a poor elderly woman spending beyond her means rather than a wealthy woman living far below hers. The solution, Patricia concluded, is strict budget management and possibly exploring more affordable housing options. Linda nodded enthusiastically. There are some beautiful senior communities, Mom, much less expensive than maintaining this house. They thought they were saving me from financial ruin. In reality, they were trying to manage someone who could buy and sell both their houses without noticing the expense. The breaking point came when Linda announced she'd made appointments for me at 3 different senior housing facilities. Mom, I've done the research. Sunset Village has a lovely 1-bedroom unit for $800 a month, utilities included. You'd have meal service, activities, and no maintenance worries. She'd spread brochures across my coffee table like she was planning a vacation, not dismantling my life. I've already put a deposit down to hold the unit, she continued. We can tour it tomorrow, and if you like it, you can move in next month. The sooner we get you into affordable housing, the sooner we can start rebuilding your savings. Linda, I don't want to live in senior housing. Mom, you don't have a choice. You're burning through money you don't have. Patricia ran the numbers at your current spending rate. You'll be broke within 2 years. That's when I realized Linda's plan wasn't just about managing my money, it was about managing me. She wanted me in a controlled environment where my spending could be monitored, where I couldn't embarrass her with purchases she deemed inappropriate for someone of my supposed economic status. I've also talked to Dr. Peterson about your financial decision-making, Linda continued. He's concerned about seniors who become confused about money. There are legal ways to protect people from their own poor judgment. The threat was clear but unspoken. If I didn't cooperate with her housing plans, she'd pursue having me declared financially incompetent. Linda, I said carefully, there are things about my situation that you don't understand. What things? Mom, I've seen your bank statements. I know exactly what you have. You've seen one bank statement from one account. Linda's expression shifted slightly. What do you mean? I mean, you've made assumptions based on incomplete information. Mom, stop being cryptic. You don't have secret money hidden somewhere. You worked at Peterson's Market for 40 years and lived in the same small house. Where would mysterious money come from? I looked at my daughter's successful, confident Linda, who'd built her identity around being the responsible one, the practical one, the daughter who had to manage her naive mother's finances. You'll find out on Tuesday? I said quietly. Find out what on Tuesday? When we read Aunt Helen's will. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all the lights off, staring at the refrigerator covered with photos of Linda's children, my grandchildren, who barely knew me because Linda was too embarrassed to bring them around very often. The house felt heavy with secrets and misunderstandings. For 15 years since Frank died, I'd maintained the fiction of being a poor widow because it felt safer, simpler. People treated you differently when they knew you had money. They wanted things from you, made assumptions about what you owed them. But tonight I wondered if keeping the secret had been a mistake. Linda's contempt for what she saw as my financial irresponsibility had poisoned our relationship. She didn't see a mother who'd worked hard and invested wisely. She saw a foolish old woman who needed to be controlled. I thought about Frank, how he'd encouraged my early investment experiments even when we could barely afford the risk. "Betty," he'd say, "you've got a good head for numbers. Trust your instincts." My instincts had been excellent. The $25 a month I'd started investing in 1983 had grown into a portfolio worth more than Linda made in 5 years. The small house I'd bought with careful planning was now worth 10 times what we'd paid for it. The simple grocery store clerk had become a millionaire through patience, research, and compound interest. But my daughter saw none of that intelligence or success. She saw only the carefully maintained facade of modest living and interpreted it as poverty mixed with poor judgment. Tomorrow's will reading would change everything. The question was whether Linda would be proud of my success or resentful that I'd hidden it from her. I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Tuesday morning, I was getting ready for the will reading when my nephew Michael called from Chicago. "Aunt Betty, I'll be there this afternoon for Helen's will reading. I wanted to talk to you first." Michael was my late brother's son, a financial advisor who'd been quietly managing my investment portfolio for 8 years. He was one of only 3 people who knew the truth about my finances. "Linda doesn't know, does she?" Michael asked. "She has no idea. She thinks I'm spending myself into poverty." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Aunt Betty, I know you wanted to keep things private, but Linda's been calling my office. She's worried about you, and she's been asking questions about whether seniors sometimes hide financial problems." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing specific, but she's suspicious. She knows Helen left money to charity instead of family, and she's wondering if there might be prizes." Michael had handled Helen's estate planning. My sister had been even more secretive than I was, living in a tiny apartment while quietly amassing a fortune through decades of careful investing. Helen's will was going to shock everyone, including me. "There's something else," Michael continued. "Linda's been researching elder financial abuse laws. I think she's planning to petition for financial guardianship over you." My blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "Incompetent spending decisions. Confusion about money management. She's been documenting what she calls your deteriorating financial judgment for months." The full scope of Linda's plan became clear. She wasn't just trying to move me into senior housing, she was building a legal case to take control of my finances entirely. In her mind, she was protecting a vulnerable elderly woman from her own poor decisions. "Michael, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Bring all my financial records to the will reading. It's time Linda learned the truth." Michael arrived at my house an hour before the will reading, carrying 2 briefcases full of documentation. As my financial advisor and power of attorney for investment decisions, he had complete records of my 40-year journey from grocery store clerk to millionaire. "Your investment portfolio alone is worth $2.8 million, Michael explained, spreading papers across my dining room table. "The house is worth $650,000. Your bond holdings, CDs, and cash accounts add another $800,000. I looked at the numbers that represented decades of patient saving, smart investing, and living below my means by choice, not necessity. "Linda's been tracking what she thinks are your only accounts," Michael continued. "She's seen the checking account where your Social Security gets deposited, and the small savings account you use for daily expenses. She has no idea about the investment accounts, the trust funds, or the property holdings. We'd structured everything carefully over the years. My modest lifestyle wasn't an act, it was a choice. I preferred my simple house to a mansion, my 10-year-old car to a luxury vehicle, my thrift store furniture to expensive showpieces. The money was there, carefully managed and growing, but it didn't need to change how I lived. "What about Helen's estate?" I asked. Michael smiled grimly. "That's going to be the biggest shock of all." The will reading was held at Thompson & Associates, the law firm that had handled Helen's estate planning. I arrived with Michael, while Linda came with her husband Jeff and their teenage daughter Amy, my granddaughter, who barely acknowledged my existence. Attorney Robert Thompson was a distinguished man in his 60s who'd been managing wealthy families' estates for 30 years. He greeted us formally and directed us to a conference room with a polished mahogany table. Linda sat across from me, her expression mixing concern with anticipation. She'd clearly expected Helen's will to be simple, a modest estate divided among family members, perhaps enough to cover a few months of my expenses. "Before we begin with Helen Walsh's will," Mr. Thompson announced, "there are some preliminary matters to discuss. Mrs. Betty Walsh, your nephew Michael indicated you'd like to address some family financial concerns." Linda straightened in her chair. "Actually, that's part of why we're here. My mother has been having some difficulties with money management lately, and we're exploring options for financial guardianship." "What kind of difficulties, Mr.?" Thompson asked mildly. "Overspending, confusion about her budget, unrealistic purchases given her fixed income situation." Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Mrs. Walsh, would you like to respond to these concerns?" I looked at Linda, my successful daughter who'd built her entire understanding of our relationship on false assumptions. "Linda, do you remember when you told me to stop acting rich?" Her face flushed slightly. "Mom, that's not. I was trying to help you be realistic about your situation. I wasn't acting rich, sweetheart. I was being rich." The silence in the conference room was absolute. Linda stared at me like I'd started speaking in a foreign language. Michael opened his briefcase and began placing documents on the table. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, and financial reports that told the story of 40 years of careful wealth building. "Mrs. Linda Walsh Porter," Mr. Thompson said formally, "I'd like you to review these documents. They represent your mother's complete financial portfolio, managed by her designated financial advisor for the past 8 years. Linda's hands shook as she picked up the first statement. Her eyes widened as she processed the numbers. "Mom, this can't be right. This says you have almost $3 million. "It's right," I said quietly. "But how? You worked at a grocery store. You live in a tiny house. You shop with coupons. I worked at a grocery store and invested every spare dollar for 40 years. I live in a house I love, not a house I can't afford. I shop with coupons because it's a habit that served me well." Linda flipped through page after page of investment records, property holdings, and financial growth charts that painted the picture of a woman who'd built wealth through intelligence and discipline, not luck or inheritance. "You let me think you were poor," she whispered. "I let you make assumptions. I was worried about you. I thought you were spending yourself into poverty. You were worried about your inheritance," I corrected gently. "And you were embarrassed by what you thought was my financial irresponsibility." Linda's face went through a series of emotions, shock, confusion, and growing realization of how badly she misunderstood everything. "Now," Mr. Thompson continued, "shall we proceed with Helen Walsh's will?" The reading of Helen's will delivered the final shock. My sister had left her entire estate, worth $1.9 million to me, along with a letter explaining her own journey from secretary to secret millionaire. Linda sat in stunned silence as the numbers piled up. Far from being the poor widow she'd been trying to manage, I was now worth nearly $5 million. "Mom," Linda finally managed, "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at my daughter, this accomplished woman who'd somehow convinced herself that loving me meant controlling me. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. But more than that, I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. The revelation of my wealth transformed Linda's world in ways she hadn't anticipated. Word spread quickly through her real estate circles. The successful agent's poor mother was actually worth millions, and Linda had spent years publicly treating her like a financial burden. Her professional reputation suffered as clients wondered about an agent who couldn't even assess her own mother's financial situation accurately. How could they trust her judgment about property values and investment potential? The petition for financial guardianship she'd been preparing became a source of legal embarrassment. Her attorney quietly withdrew the paperwork after reviewing my financial records, noting that trying to have a competent millionaire declared financially incompetent would likely result in sanctions. Linda's relationship with her children became strained when they learned the truth. Amy, my granddaughter, was particularly upset to discover that her grandmother, whom she'd been taught to see as a poor elderly woman, was actually someone who could have helped with college expenses and family financial pressures. "Mom, why did you keep us away from Grandma?" Amy demanded during a family confrontation that Jeff later described to me. "You made us think she was embarrassing, but she's incredibly successful." Linda's marriage faced new tensions as Jeff questioned her judgment and values. "You treated your mother like she was a problem to be managed instead of a person to be respected," he told her. "What does that say about how you see people?" The social embarrassment was perhaps the worst consequence for Linda, who'd built her identity around being successful and perceptive. Her friends and colleagues now saw her as someone who'd spectacularly misjudged her own family situation. 6 months later, I was sitting in my same faded blue recliner, in my same small house, living my same modest lifestyle but with a profound sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The cleaning service still came twice a week, and I still shopped at Nordstrom when I felt like treating myself. But now these choices were seen as what they'd always been, the decisions of a competent adult managing her own life and resources. Michael had helped me establish a family trust that would provide for Linda's children's education and future needs, but with clear boundaries about how the money could be used. I wanted to help my family, but I also wanted them to understand that wealth came with responsibility, not entitlement. My volunteer work at the animal shelter had expanded. I'd quietly funded a new veterinary clinic and spay-neuter program, using my resources to make a difference in causes I cared about. The young staff still called me Grandma Betty. But now they understood why I could be so generous with donations. Linda and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship, but it was different now. She could no longer position herself as the responsible daughter managing a naive mother. Our conversations had to be based on mutual respect rather than assumed authority. Amy started visiting me regularly, fascinated by her grandmother's investment strategies and financial wisdom. She was considering studying finance in college, inspired by my story of building wealth through patience and smart choices. The neighborhood still saw me as the sweet elderly widow, but now some of them knew the truth. Mrs. Patterson from down the street had asked for investment advice, and Tom the mailman had commented on how nice it was to see successful seniors who stayed in their communities instead of moving to expensive retirement places. Last week, Linda brought me flowers and an apology, not the first one, but the most honest one. "Mom," she said, "I'm sorry I tried to make you smaller than you were because I couldn't see how big you actually are. It was a good start, but the real healing was happening inside me. For years, I'd kept my success secret to avoid complications, judgments, and changes to relationships I valued. But the secret had created its own problems. It had allowed people who claimed to love me to treat me as less capable, less worthy of respect, less deserving of autonomy. Yesterday, a woman called me from the senior center. Her son was pressuring her to move into assisted living because he thought she couldn't afford her current apartment. She'd heard about my situation through the neighborhood grapevine. "How did you handle it," she asked, "when your family underestimated you?" I thought about Linda's words, "Stop acting rich," and how they'd revealed so much about her assumptions and so little about my reality. I realized. I told her that when someone tells you to stop acting like something you actually are, the problem isn't your acting. The problem is their seeing. The woman laughed, a sound of recognition and relief. So you just kept being yourself? I kept being myself, I confirmed. And eventually reality caught up with their assumptions. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my modest living room, the faded furniture I loved, the simple life I'd chosen, the wealth I'd built quietly and carefully over decades of disciplined choices. I'd spent years letting other people's limited vision of me limit how I lived. But wealth isn't just about money. It's about the freedom to define yourself on your own terms. I stopped acting rich when I realized I didn't need to act at all. I just needed to be,